Hello everyone! Thank you for joining our first Lunch and Learn of the new year. As always, it is served by the FileMaker team at Cross IT. But before we dig in, remember that you have a chance to win lunch on us if you leave a comment or ask a question during the live stream. That means we'll send you a gift card. So please send us your email address somehow, some way, so we can contact you. As you've probably figured out by our series of Lunch and Learn sessions extolling the virtues of Claris FileMaker, we love the platform. But there are times we need to share FileMaker data with another system. It could be an internal system or with an external client or supplier. In today's Lunch and Learn, we're going to cover a basic method for sharing data: exports. So without further ado, let me pass the microphone over to Todd.
All right, thank you, Kristen, for that introduction. Again, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking about exporting. I know with FileMaker, as the platform has evolved and technology has improved, there's a lot of ways that we can share data with those external systems. We have ODBC connections that we can use. There are APIs, both external APIs that we can have FileMaker talk to, or we can set FileMaker server up as a data API to exchange information that way. But there are times when there's no school like the old school. And so that's where this idea of just doing a basic export comes in. And that's what we want to kind of look at today. As we looked at what our schedule has been for the Lunch and Learns, the last few have been certainly focused more towards developers or power users of FileMaker Pro who are building solutions and customizing them and making changes. It's been a while since we've talked to the users that have need where they need to do this for their job, but they're not constantly in there building things. This is something certainly that general users or those power users can do to help make their job better, to get the customer or the vendor the information that they need. And so that's what we're going to go ahead and look at here today. So with that, just have really just the one slide to kind of help us along. And this whole idea of exporting is it allows us to use FileMaker data in another application or system. That's its function, its bare essence. And so there's a number of different supported formats. You have text files, which can be formatted as tab separated values or comma separated values, which are fairly common. There's also a DBF format. If you have a DBase system that you need to get information to, you can export in that format. There's also merge files that you can generate. You can generate your data as an HTML table. You can also use XML. Probably the most popular one is Excel workbooks, which is going to kind of be our focus here today because that is so common. There's I don't know the exact percentage, but I'm sure it's a very high percentage of companies that use the Microsoft Office suite of products in their company. And so being able to hand somebody an Excel file that has the information they need is certainly very helpful. And then, of course, last but not least, there are times when you actually want to export your information into FileMaker Pro. I do that quite often if I need to get information out of one file, massage it a little bit, and then either put it back in because something happened to it or transfer it to another system, just because I know FileMaker Pro, so if I have to manipulate the data once I've got it exported, I might as well keep it in FileMaker Pro. So that is an option. And of course, there's quite a bit of information. If there's anything that we miss in our discussion today, you can certainly check it out at Claris FileMaker's Help. And you can see the link right there for you to take a look. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. And as soon as I find my mouse here, we'll get over to the data set that we're going to be looking at. Is just some fun information. It's actually based on a file that I put together to track my roller coaster riding. And since it's January in Western Pennsylvania and I'm already thinking about what roller coasters I can ride as soon as the weather turns nice, I thought it'd be nice to take a look back at all the roller coasters I've ridden over the last few years. So this is what we're looking at here. So this is just a layout with all the records. I know there's a couple things we need to be aware of as we get ready to do our exports. Is that you need to have, of course, the permissions to view the information, just, basic information, permissions there to view the records and see all the fields. But then also there's a separate permission that lets you set up to be able to do exports. Now, obviously, if you are the developer of the solution that you're using, you have the full access privileges, so you're going to be able to do all of those things. If you're in that power user or general user category where you just need to do this to help do your job, maybe once in a while, you would need to make sure that you do have the right permissions to get those exports. We had talked about maybe sometime in the fall about scripting an export. And that's for those processes where you need to get information out of your system and hand it off to somebody else, once a month or once a week or maybe even once a day, where it's that repeated task where you're always grabbing a found set and doing the export. You don't want to have to think about it. You just want to be able to tap a button. Well, what we're going to be talking about here today are those times where it's kind of like those one-offs or just like an ad hoc kind of thing where you get a special request from someone and say, hey, could you pull me information on XYZ? And so that's where we come in. All right, so let's take a look first at the permissions, because like I said, that's kind of key. If you can't see the data, you're not going to be able to export it. So under the File Manage, under the Security, it has, there's just obviously just a couple users here. But when you go over to the Advanced Settings, and we'll just pick the full access since that's the only one. Actually, it's kind of grayed out, so that it's easier to see. I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate our data entry only one just so that we can see things a little bit easier. We'll edit that, and you'll see here's our normal information where we have access to the records and the layouts and the value lists and scripts and all that normal stuff. But over here under the other privileges in this dialog box here on the right hand side, you can see that there is a separate checkbox here to allow exporting. So if that's not checked, users with those assigned permissions are not going to be able to export the data. So just be aware that you would want to check that along with just the ability to see the records. All right, so that could be one potential gotcha you want to take a look at. All right, so that's the first thing with the permissions. And so now we are ready to go ahead and export. And just so that the information means a little bit more to us, I'm just going to go ahead and sort things here. And I'm going to sort it by the name of the park that I visited as well as the coaster that I rode. And it'll take just a second here to do the sort. And so now we have our list of information, and we want to get that and hand it off to somebody. All right, and so like I said, go here under File, and it's Export Records is the script step, or there is a script step, I should say. We're looking at the menu command right now, and that is to export the records. And depending on which of those choices that you have for your type of export, you're going to have some additional options. Okay. Now, like I said, the first ones here are your tab separated or comma separated values. You get into some of the more specialized ones, and then you've got FileMaker Pro, XML, and then the one down on the bottom is for Excel. So I'm going to go ahead and just start with comma separated so we can see what that looks like. That's one that I've used fairly often. You can see here that after saving, you have a couple other options that you can do where you can have it automatically open the file if you want to. You can also go ahead and create an email with the file as an attachment, as long as everything's set up right for your email client on your computer. It'll go ahead and draft an email for you and make that attachment, and then you can send it off to whoever needs to see it, which is certainly helpful and often saves a step. Now, the one thing you'll notice too is that as I change the type of export that I'm looking, it's already going ahead and updating my extension on the file. So I'm just going to go ahead and call this our first export. Okay. And then I just go over here, I click Save, and then now it is giving me a list of all of the fields that are on my layout over here on this left-hand side. It's showing me it's grouped by this because I've already done a sort, so it's remembered that information from the sort that I just performed. And then now I have this ability here to move things over here for this, the field export order. Okay. And So now I can decide, okay, to what all do I want to do? And things are probably pretty good right there. I'm just going to go ahead and move all of them over. All right, and now it's pretty much done it by alphabetical order just because that's how I have things set up. But then I can go ahead and adjust the order to make it make sense for me. So probably having the time right after the date makes sense. And then probably I'm just going to go ahead and move the coaster information up above the park information. And we're just going to go ahead and adjust that so that it kind of matches, a little bit, the order that I have the information showing up on, my layout. Ooh, I missed a field down here. Let me get this back up. There we go. And then name, city, state for the location. And now, again, this is one of those ones that's a custom option depending, again, on what type of export you're doing. You'll notice down here that I'm able to select the output file character set. And it's going to default to whatever it is on your computer. You see there's a number of different options for Windows and ASCII, specific Macintosh, the Unicode UTF-16, as well as Japanese, Chinese, and Korean character sets, again depending on where you're at. So you have a few options there, but usually it's going to default to what you need. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave that alone. And then the last step here is just go over here and do our export. And of course it threw it on my other desktop, so I'm going to grab that and move it over. And I'm just going to go ahead and open this with our text editor, so you can just kind of see. And so this is what we get, and there's a lot of information. We can see that everything's escaped with quotes. It's got commas in between it. So from it looks like a CSV. So I think we were certainly successful with that attempt. All right, so then we can just pass that off to the person who's requested it, and then go on from there. All right, so that's CSV. Now we had actually built this discussion as we were talking about specifically exporting to Excel, again just because that seems to be the most common use for sharing information in this type of format, where you just someone's asked you for information, it's just easiest to get them to Excel. So if we go back down here, you will notice that there is export records. We'll do that again. This time I'm going to go ahead and switch it over here to the Excel. All right, and I'm going to call this our second export. Click Save. Now this is where we get a few different options because we are exporting to Excel. We now have the information to assign some of the metadata that comes along with Excel, which will be like the worksheet name, the title, subject, author, if you want to do anything with that. You also have the option to use the field names as column names as in the first row, which is typically something you're going to want to do just to save yourself some time. And so I'm going to go ahead and leave that option there checked. Click Continue. Now what you'll notice is that because I had just done an export, I haven't closed the file or changed my view, it's gone ahead and remembered, even though I'm going now to Excel instead of a CSV file, that it still remembered what my export order was. Okay, so that's kind of nice that if you export something and realize, oh, I forgot a field or I need to change the order a little bit, you don't have to recreate it completely from scratch during that same session. Now, one of the other things that we did not touch on is that you'll see here that this option here is the current layout. Okay, well, you have a few more options here, and that is you can look at the current table because there is information about that ride experience that I collect just because I'm a roller coaster geek, so I collect that information. Or I guess I'm a roller coaster maniac and a geek, so you put the two together, I collect everything I can. And you can see here, this is all the contents of that ride experience table, which is more than just date, time, and where I happen to be sitting. You can see I'm capturing when I entered the queue, when I sat down in the roller coaster. I can give it a rating. Also, count the number of steps that I took while I was walking in the queue and those kinds of things, which maybe I want to use it. Maybe it doesn't make sense to have on this viewable form that we see behind us, but it's something that maybe because of the system that it's going to needs to be included in the export. So I can go ahead and come in here and actually select that, which is good. Also, there's some summary fields as far as the number of rides that have been taken, summing up the total, so, and that's what I'm going to go ahead and do here. As I'm going to go ahead and add this ride count to the list, and I'm just going to go ahead and let it be put in here at the back. Now this is another area where you're going to want to make sure that you understand what's going on under the hood, especially if you're not a design or the person who designed the system, because FileMaker is very context sensitive. Like I said, the default here is that it starts with the current layout, but then you have the current table, but then you also have these related tables, because from the ride, I know that this ride was on this roller coaster, and that roller coaster sat in this park. So if I'm pulling all that information in, I need to understand what the relationships are between those three tables. So as long as you have, where the data is, you can certainly get to it and then export it. But you just want to understand that as you kind of dive into this and start setting up your exports. Now, if you're exporting everything is all in one table, you're golden. You don't have to think about it. You would just have to switch, maybe back and forth between the layout and the table to get, the right number of fields that you need for that export. But just something to be aware of there. All right, so we've added our extra field here for this export. So now I can go ahead and run the export. And of course it threw it over here on my other monitor. So I'm going to bring that over here. And then I'm just going to go ahead and open that with Microsoft Excel, which again, put it on the other monitor. So let me go ahead and get that over here so you can all see that. Okay. All right, so pretty much looks the way we would expect it to look, where we've got, all of our columns, okay? Now what you'll notice here is for those pieces of information that come from a related table, it does not just include the name when it names your column. You'll see that it actually uses the FileMaker naming convention, with the table name, field name, which is what you'll see here, like in these columns. We can see that that's all from the coaster information table. And then we get down here and we can see everything that's in the park. So again, depending on how the file is being used, that may be something that you'll have to go back into and, kind of clean up so you don't confuse somebody that you just want it to be, coaster name. All right, so we could just, because like I said, once it's in Excel, you can do, whatever you like, and so you could, rename it there. So that may be something that the system is going to, if there's a lot of fields that you have to rename, it may be better to uncheck that box so you don't even get the field names for your columns, and it's just easier to go back in and then add it after the fact. Another thing just to be aware of here in FileMaker is that we had added our summary field, which hopefully we're all familiar with how a summary field works in FileMaker. But when it gets exported to Excel, you'll notice that it's not a formula. It's just this static number here, and that's because we're just exporting the data. We're not exporting the formulas. It's not being converted to the equivalent, Excel formula. So that's something there just to be aware of, and also that may determine, which fields again would be included in the export. Because if you have to go back in and you want to make your resulting Excel file dynamic, you're going to want to go back in, make those changes, to make this a formula or make that, some type of summary calculation. So it may make sense to not export it from FileMaker, but just go ahead and then modify the Excel file once you're done. And since you're going to have to go back in and touch it anyway, why include it in the export? But if you don't have to have that information, you can just run the export and then you're ready to move on. Okay, so that's a good thing there. Now there's one other option that's specific to exporting to Excel, and that's a different option here that we have that we're going to go ahead and look at. Now it is in our menu here as Save and Send Records As, and you'll see that we have the option to save as Excel. All right, so how is that different from the exports? Well, I'm glad you asked. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. You'll see we've got our, the same layout that we've been looking at. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and change things up here. I'm just going to look at everything that I wrote in 2021. And then just go ahead and reapply our sort so we can see the data look a little bit nicer. And so there we've got our information. And so let's go ahead and try that for our third export. But we're going to just do Save Send Records as Excel. Okay, so again, so far this is looking pretty much the same. All right, I call this the third export. Give it a name. Now what you'll notice now is that instead of saving the type, is that now I have the option of what I'm saving as far as all of the records that are being browsed or just the current record. So this is behaving a little bit more like the print options that we have rather than the export records option. So there's obviously, there's that one difference. All right, there's a few more options in here, which are those Excel options. It didn't pop up automatically, so you can still set those values. It's just you have to click the options button when you're saving records as Excel. I'm not going to worry about that at this point. Now let's go ahead and, since I'm here, we'll give it a name. Okay. All right, and so now when I hit save, I don't pick any fields. All right, so what happened? All right, well again, let me get over here to my other desktop, grab the file, go ahead and open that up, and then move that from my other desktop, except it's not letting me shrink it. There we go, so that it'll fit on. All right, so things are looking a little different, and what just happened? Okay, you'll see that we've got our ride date, our ride time actual, and our ride position, but we don't have any of those other fields. Well, what the Save Send Records as Excel does is it uses the information on the layout to then generate your export. So you don't have to do any thinking as far as what columns or what fields am I going to include in my export. It just says, okay, well, obviously what's on the layout must be what you want. Okay, but obviously I've got some other information there because you can see here that, when I went to Cedar Point, I wrote Blue Streak, Corkscrew, Gatekeeper, all that kind of stuff. So why is that information not on my Excel file? Okay, well, as you go in and we edit our FileMaker layout, you'll see that the only things that are in the body of my layout are my ride date, the ride time, and the ride position. Everything else is part of a subsummary. So I have lost that information, or it's not really lost, but because it's not part of the body, that Save as Excel option didn't pick up on that. So if I would come in here and say, and we won't add everything, but we'll just add a few. So we'll modify this layout here, switch over to the coaster, and we'll just grab, let's see, the name, drop that in there, and everybody likes to know how fast the roller coaster is, so we'll just throw that one on there too. And then just do a little bit of formatting because it'll bug me if they don't all match. So we'll just use the eyedropper to quickly capture the information. Okay, so now when I save it, go back into Browse, obviously the layout has gotten a little bit busier because it's now repeating the name and the speed from what was up here in the sub-summary section. But now when I do the Save Send Records as Excel, this is our fourth import. And we'll just fly through that. Move it over here. Open it. And then move that over here. You can see now, because those fields have been added to the body, now I have them added into my export. Depending on your comfort level, sometimes maintaining a layout specific to your Excel exports is kind of handy, because that way you don't have to play around with all of the settings that are part of the file export records process. You can just do these save records as Excel from your specific layout that has everything that you need, and then you're good to go. So again, that's more of a preference than you have to do it one way or the other. It's just whatever works best for you. Now another thing, I'm going to point this out, and hopefully it works the way that I remember it. So I'm going to drop back into layout mode, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and add some visibility here to always hide those two objects. Okay, so now I'm back in browse mode. The information is gone, but the fields are still there in the body. They're just hidden because of how I made that simple calculation there to always be true. All right, so now if I go back in, do the save send records as Excel, we'll make this our fifth export. Go ahead and do save. And it drops it over here. Go ahead and open it. Is that here's our fifth export, and even though the fields are hidden from view because they're still in that body section on the layout, they were still included in my save records as Excel process. So that's another way that if you need to include some of those fields using that method, but you don't want to create an export or a specific export layout, you can just go ahead and add the fields and then hide them in some way so that they'll still show up. So a nice little helpful tip, hopefully, for that information. So I think that is everything that I wanted to cover surrounding the exports. Again, there's certainly newer methods to pass data back and forth between other systems, but sometimes you do need to do an export, whether it's just to look at the data in a different format or hand it off to somebody. Obviously, we would prefer that everybody just gets their data into FileMaker and then leaves it there because that's the best way, but that's not always an option. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and turn it over and see if we have any questions.
Indeed, we do have questions. So which exports are most common?
I would say probably the most common exports are probably the ones that I focused on, at least that's just from my own experience. I know obviously depending on the systems that you're working with, you might have a need where a DBase export is very important, or XML. But from my experience has been probably 99% of the exports I've ever had to do have either been one of the tab or comma separated exports or Excel with the occasional FileMaker Pro export thrown in.
Okay. So when export to Excel, are we able to format the data?
Yes and no. To a certain degree, FileMaker will pick up on just the general formatting. Like if it knows that it's a date, it'll format it as a date. If it's time, you'll try to format it as a time. And that's kind of the basic stuff. If you want to do anything more than that, it does require some extra effort. I've worked on some systems where because I didn't want to have to make the user go back in and relabel columns, I created a separate table that I then collected all the data that I wanted to export, copied it over to this other table, and then exported it over to there, so I had control over what the field names were, from that standpoint. But again, that's a lot of extra effort for what you're trying to accomplish. There's also some third-party tools that are available from developers within the FileMaker community that allow you to use some plugins to actually insert data into like a Excel template, where instead of having to worry about, I got to go back in and replace this calculation, the calculation would be part of the template, and the way you would use like a merge document in Word, you would be able to take your data and get it into the right columns in a file or an Excel file. Now I have to say personally, I've never had to do any of that, but I do know that the tool exists. So if that's something that's critical to having your Excel file be more robust than just here's columns of text and numbers, that would be one option that you would have.
All right. Are there any problems with exporting data?
Yeah, there's. I mean, the biggest problem really is that as soon as you export it, the data is not dynamic anymore. Like if you have a hosted solution where you've got multiple users, as soon as you do the export, then you're just looking at a snapshot of the data at that point in time, and so you have to keep that in mind as you're handing it off. Now, obviously, if you're exporting because you need to provide a customer with their year-end inventory, that is by nature going to be a snapshot, so it's not a problem. But that's where some of these other methods for using an API or an ODBC connection or some other scripted method that keeps the data in sync is going to be a little bit better, because you'll be able to work with that dynamic data rather than having something static. But again, it all depends on your process, so it may not be a concern, but that's certainly one thing to just be aware of.
All right. Well, that is all the questions I see here. Do you have any others?
I don't think so.
Okay, so we have a few upcoming events we'd like to mention as we close. With the start of the new year, we are offering a second Lunch and Learn this month. On Wednesday, January 26th, Todd will dive deeper into the topic of the day for our a la carte session. If you are in the Pittsburgh area and want to talk FileMaker with like-minded individuals, please consider joining our next meetup on Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022 at 7 p.m. Due to some scheduling issues with our regular venue, this meeting will be held in an online-only format. So you can get all of the details and sign up for the meeting by visiting our website at www.crossit.com. Again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us today. If you like what you saw and heard, please click the thumbs up and share this video. If you haven't subscribed, please, we humbly ask that you do. You can also hit the bell to get notified. Some of the content presented as part of our Lunch and Learn sessions are the result of your questions. If you have a suggestion for a future topic, or if a specific FileMaker problem has you stumped, please submit those topics and questions by emailing us at nutshell@crossit.com. Your idea or question may be the featured topic of a future Lunch and Learn. From all of us at CrossIT, we are glad to have served you. Have a great day and a Happy New Year.